all the things that have made me really excited about the opportunity to come here and speak to you. And this is going to be a little bit sermon, a little bit testimony, and a little bit foundation commercial, okay? Can we handle that today? A little bit of a commercial for the Church of the Nazarene Foundation. But I have been looking forward to this. Had a little taste of this when I was here before. This church is more exciting than most churches that I go to. So I speak at 30 or more churches a year and go to about a dozen district assemblies. But this is a place where you know everybody is alive. You know that it's a very focused church. Just been here for a few minutes this morning, and I learned that you do three things, and I'll bet you know exactly what they are. I just heard them from your pastor, and I'm not sure I can say them the same way. But one of them, what's the first one? One of them is you're a dispenser of grace. Is that right? So you're a place where grace can administer from the Holy Spirit to the people. And the second one, I believe you said that you love people who are in need, and you love them with the love of Jesus. And the third one is that you're all about changing the community of Bronx. Did I get that right? Yes. That's not the first time you heard that, is it? You know exactly who you are as a church, and that's very, very impressive. This place is a lot different than where I live. I invite you to come see me. In rural Franklin County, Kansas, where we live on a gravel road, in the country, and I got tickets to come here to New York City and my motel, and somehow my phone listens to me and my computer pays attention to what's going on, and so I began to be flooded with people that were really interested in me being happy in New York City. They were telling me about tours to take and shows that I should see and museums that I should go to. And so I got a lot of these things that said, you need to come see us. You'll be happier when you come to New York City if you do this. I'm pretty sure that they were interested in me also leaving some of my money behind when I come to your city for my happiness. But I did note that you have 29 Broadway shows happening. And these are just a few of the things that make life in rural Kansas different than life in New York City, just how different it is. So the largest city in our county is 12,000. We live outside of that community a little bit, and we don't have 29 Broadway shows happening. In fact, within 30 miles, we have one movie theater. It happens to be the oldest continuously operated movie theater in the United States. Now, my wife and I'm pretty sure that we have been to 4 movies in the it'd be 39 years and 11 months we've been married, and we've been to 4 movies. So we go about once a decade. And we decided after we moved to Ottawa that we should probably go to the movie theater in town, which has been there since 1907. It was there before people were considering parking, so it has 0 parking. It's in a shared wall downtown. And we got to the movie theater, and we realized when we walked in that there were some unusual things. One is that we were the young people at the movie theater, and we discovered that everybody else in the movie theater knew each other and knew that we weren't regulars. But we kind of made it through that, shook some hands, and talked to people before the movie. We went to see Top Gun as it came out a year or so ago. And the announcements went up, everything was happening. We heard the music start to begin the movie. And we listened to it for a minute or so, and then the prelude and all of it stopped. And then it started over again, and we heard it again. To this point, we hadn't seen anything. And it was at this point that the owner of the movie theater, who was also the one selling the popcorn and taking the tickets at the door, came out and said, "Must apologize to you, but the bulb has burned out in the projector." And we don't keep an extra one because they're very expensive. They cost $200. It's $8.25 to go. It costs $200, and it takes us a couple days to get one ordered and get in, so there will be no movie tonight. So I invite you to our community, but I don't expect that you will be flooded with advertisements that say, please, here's all the things you can do while you're in our town, because they're just not there. So a few of the other differences there. My wife says that I get blessed by numbers, and I guess I do, because I live in a township. We live in a township that's 36 square miles, so it's 6 miles on all four sides. And in that 36 square miles, we have more cattle than we do people. And we have registered voters totaling 129. So if you get 65 people to vote for you, you're in. But usually when we vote on something in the township, there's either one name or no name. Sometimes it's like, here's the position and nobody's running for it, whether it's the rural water district leadership or something on there. So I always write my wife's name in on that. So I have voted for my wife many times, and I'm glad that she's here with me today. She doesn't always get to travel with me, but she really wanted to come on this trip. And if I preach more than an hour, she'll look at me and start pointing to where her wristwatch would be. If I preach more than an hour and a half, she'll be looking at me very sternly. And if I preach, I actually don't know what happens if I preach 2 hours. I've never done that. But I'm sure that there will be a message that will come across really loud and clear. So these 129 voters live in our township. And I looked, and the Bronx averages in 36 square miles about 1,260,000 people. So we have a couple hundred where you have that. Then I decided to think about the space. We don't have a lot in Kansas, but we do have space. And we live on 17 acres, which is the smallest parcel out there for the two of us. And in the Bronx, you have about 929 people that live on that much land. So it is just a different world. But here's what I really like about being a Christian, and what I really specifically like about being a Christian who is a member of the Church of the Nazarene. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter where we're from. It doesn't matter where we live, even if it's as different as Kansas and the Bronx. None of that matters, because we are united by the love of Jesus Christ. We are united by that love. Together, we are committed to making a difference in the world that's around us and sweeping up a bunch of people and take them to heaven with us, right? And we're not just interested in their salvation, we're interested in their full salvation, that they are baptized with the Holy Spirit, sanctified through and through. That's who we are. My spiritual legacy began in a little church in southern Ohio, on a farm in the country, small town, much smaller than the town I live in right now. The town I grew up in had 900 people. It has since shrunk. It's to about 500 now. But we lived on a farm on the outside of there, and there was a small church in there called the Felicity Church of the Nazarene. And at the Felicity Church of the Nazarene, I gave my heart to Jesus during a revival service when I was 8 years old. There was no other people that came to the altar that night. We had a gospel quartet in, and they were a husband and wife, son and daughter. They all played guitars and sang gospel music, and I have no idea what the preaching was about that night. I know that they all preached, but nobody knew who was preaching that night until one of them sensed the anointing of God's Spirit, and that happened to be the mom, Edna West. Edna West preached. I sensed in my heart that something needed to change. I went down to the altar, the only one who went to the altar. A bunch of the saints of the church gathered around me to pray. There was a particular saint I would have referred to as a little old lady, for I never saw her in anything but a dress that went all the way to the ground, long sleeves down to here, and a bun in her hair. Just gives you the kind of church I grew up in. And her name was Mrs. Henson, and she gathered around. We prayed and prayed, and at the end of the prayer, she said, "Mark, I have a question for you. Do you believe that the Lord has forgiven you of sin?" And I very confidently responded to that question, "No, I don't." So if you know anything about Nazarene churches in the 1960s, I suppose you could guess what happened next, right? Back to the altar, pray more, pray longer, pray harder, pray louder. We beat all the sin you can beat out of a little 8-year-old boy. And when Mrs. Henson asked me the next time, do you believe that the Lord has forgiven you of your sins? I could just as confidently answer, yes, I do. I believe that. I am part of the legacy of the Felicity Church of the Nazarene, not because I'm anything special, but that's where I gave my heart to Jesus. That was the community of people that invested their life in that community so a little boy could get saved. So the little boy could learn about Jesus and learn to walk as a disciple of Jesus Christ, and to everybody's surprise, grow up to be a preacher and work in the kingdom of God. So I appreciate the people who invested in that church, who built me and trained me for a path of walking with Jesus. That didn't come easy. It came because of sacrifice. And it didn't come cheap. There was a cost to that. There was a cost to having a church with a heritage, a church with a legacy, a church that really desired to make sure that people found their way in life. Well, I love that church, love those people. They invested in my future. They listened to me preach starting when I was 15 years of age, and that had to be hard. Someday when we get to heaven, I'm going to apologize to all the people that listened to those sermons when I was 15 years old, and hopefully I've gotten just slightly better since then. But they did. They poured their hearts into me. That was the church that guided me in my call when I was heading into 7th grade. I felt like the Lord wanted me to be a preacher. There were no preachers in my family, but I felt this call in my heart. Knew there was something going on, needed to respond to this. What I didn't know is that on the first day of 7th grade, Mrs. James's English class, that Mrs. James would ask everybody in the class to stand up and say what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I didn't know that I would be the very last person in the last row to stand up and say what I wanted. And I was really tempted to say a farmer or a fireman or a doctor or something. But I knew that those were wrong answers, and the right answers would be to stand in front of my friends and my school teacher and say I wanted to be a preacher when I grew up. I'd not told anybody. So I said, I want to be a preacher when I grew up. Stood up and said that. And the 7th grade classroom full of my classmates started laughing. And my teacher scolded me and said, Mark, you're not going to be a cut-up in this class. Now I want you to stand up again, and this time I want you to be serious. So I believe that the enemy of the soul was there that day and gave me a nice out to where I could have diverted from my calling and done something different. Somehow the grace of God was there sufficient enough for me to stand up and say, no, I was serious. This is what I want to be when I grow up. And then the bell rang and went out the hall, and there were people everywhere saying, Mark Lail said he wants to be a preacher. Mark Lail said he wants to be a preacher. And everybody's laughing. It's just going like wildfire down through the hall. And I began to wear a title that was derogatory. It was intended to be derogatory, which was the word preacher. So the first times in my life that I was ever called preacher, it was to be made fun of and to be a derogatory term. But it became an affectionate term. Even my friends started calling me preacher. In fact, by the time I was in high school, I'm pretty sure there were high school teachers that didn't know my first name, because it was just preacher. Preacher? If I was playing basketball, getting ready to make a foul shot, preacher, make the shot, preacher. So it kind of keeps you out of trouble when you're a teenager who's called preacher already. You kind of have a little bit to live up to in this whole thing. But this is my story, and this is the church that gave me a place that didn't have to. They invested in me. It was a generous church. It was a church that has a good legacy. It's also a church that through most of my life would run 30 or 40 people on Sunday morning. When we were really on fire, we'd get up close to 100, and then things would change a little bit there. I love the Church of the Nazarene. I love that church, and I'm glad that they have invested in the future generations of people who need to have a place to kneel at an altar, a place where little boys can be called, saved, called, and follow the call of Jesus in their life. Well, I do work at the Global Ministry Center, and one of the advantages there is we have a lot of numbers. I mentioned them. My wife says I really like numbers, and I do, so I look numbers up before I come to preach. And I can see many blessings from the Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene. Your first full year's pastor's report was 1965, and that fits with the 60th anniversary, right? Probably started in 1964. And so I looked at that year, and you passed the offering plate that year, and total raised for all purposes was $1,670. Congratulations, you took the offering in 1965. And you decided to give 115 of those dollars to the World Evangelism Fund. That would have been called the general budget at that time, but it's the basic missionary fund of our denomination. So we have about 4,800 churches in the United States and 23,000, I think, across the world. And you decided that that church is worthy of your investment and gave 115 of those dollars that year. You have never failed to give to the World Evangelism Fund in the 60 years of your history. So thank you. Okay. In fact, to the World Evangelism Fund in that 60 years, you have given $1.6 million to the World Evangelism Fund. You have participated in additional offerings such as Alabaster and World Mission Radio and several of the sponsored missionaries and so forth. And so we have a record of you giving another $350,000 to those. And I'm sure that there's millions of dollars beyond that have gone in this community toward missionary activity. But I not only have access to numbers, I have access to people who do numbers really well. So I asked the research department, well, if $115 bought a lot more in 1965 than it does now, what if you add these all up and put everything in today's dollars? What has the Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene done for missions? And that, in today's dollars, you're giving to Nazarene missions, just the part that goes to the denomination, has totaled $3.04 million. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for giving. I believe there are people in heaven because you gave. I believe that there are people who are standing in pulpits today because they got saved here and grew up and developed out. And because you are a sending church, you are a legacy church. A little bit famous in the denomination. You've had some famous kind of pastors. You know, there is such a thing as Nazarene famous. You go across the world and everybody that's Nazarenes know who you are. So I happened to be with all of the district superintendents across the United States and Canada this last week, and everybody was talking about what they were going to do after this meeting and where they were going next and so forth. And a few times I said, well, I'm going to be preaching it. I was bragging a little bit. I'm going to be preaching at Bronx Bethany this Sunday. And there wasn't one of them that didn't have a positive opinion about this Church of the Nazarene. Didn't have to say, Bronx Bethany, no, they knew about this church and knew where it is. So you are a legacy church. The things that you're doing now, that's all right, you deserve it. The things you're doing now is to boost your legacy, not to start it. It's already in works. But this will boost and elevate your legacy. Now we're going to turn our attention to a cool old man from the Old Testament. His name is Caleb. And he wanted to establish a spiritual legacy as well. But he was also one of the individuals that God chose to go someplace really, really different. You know, like I did my Google work here to see what this place is like and where I should go when I'm in Kansas City, when I'm in New York City and all this. So he didn't have that option because the internet didn't exist in the Old Testament. And so he just had to blindly walk out on faith away from a life that had become crippling as slaves in Egypt. He followed Moses out. This is the character of Caleb. He followed Moses out with a dream, having no idea what this new place looked like, what he was stepping into, or where he was going. He just knew God said to go there, and God said it was going to be good. That's what he knew. It's going to be there, go God's way, and it's going to be good. So he's part of the big miracle of coming out of Egypt, out of slavery. And he was actually one of the 12 spies in Canaan land. You know a couple of those, right? Caleb, and what was the other one's name? Yeah, is there anybody here that can name the other 10? They're actually named in the Bible. But we just kind of lump those 10 together as the ones who failed. You know, Caleb and Joshua didn't fail. They came back with a great story. But those went back. The other 10, we can't remember the names because they lacked faith. And actually, the scripture that we're going to read says they made the hearts of the people grow cold. Oh, wow, if you're a legacy church, you're not making hearts grow cold. You're making hearts get warm. So this is Caleb. He was part of the spies that went into, we would call them scouts, by the way, and not spies. Scouts sounds a little more more likely to what they were doing. But they went in and checked this place out, and they came back with a story. Said, you talk about milk and honey flow, and this is the place. Now, it is happening. And we are going to be so blessed when we get to this new place. And I can just imagine that Caleb was dreaming about a spot where he could have a garden and some animals and raise his kids. But this new community that they were going to establish had a very important characteristic in that it was going to have a house for God. It was going to be a place where Caleb could take his family and worship his Lord. That's very important to the whole thing. Came back with a great story, and as you know, the 10 spies said, yeah, it's awesome. But it's so awesome, but it's also scary because they got giant people there. The grasshoppers are big. The bunches of grapes are so large, it takes 2 men to carry them. But they will squash us. They will squash us. They'll step on us like you step on a grasshopper. And he made the hearts of the people grow cold. So Caleb and Joshua, you know, if we were writing this story, we would send them to the promised land and give them the victory for their faith and send the other 10 to the wilderness for 40 years, right? It didn't work that way. The faithful and the faithless both got 40 years in the wilderness where they wandered around. So the whole land of Canaan is where they actually wandered is about the size of West Virginia. So if you've ever been to West Virginia, it's a good state. It's an awesome state. But I think if you walked around it for 40 years, things would start to look familiar. You'd at least say, I think I've been to this hill before, somewhere in here. But they wandered for 40 years. And now, in Joshua chapter 14, verses 6 through 14, we're going to come to a place where it's many years after that disobedience at Kadesh Barnea. This is the time when they are faithfully about to enter the Holy Land. It's 45 years later. They wandered for 40 years, but you do the math here. Caleb's now 85 years old. Moses is dead. And Caleb's dreams have matured. This is what we're going to see in Joshua 14, 6 through 14. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephthah, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me? I was 40 years old, said Caleb, when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts. Sounds like something changed. Okay? All right, good. All right, we're still in verse 8. My fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, this is verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. He said, I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord has promised me that day. You yourself heard that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I'll drive them out just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephthah, and gave him Hebron as an inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephthah, and the Kenizzite ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. So dreams don't have to fade. Dreams can live 45 years in the wilderness. And he had a dream. But I think his dream matured. I think that his dream at the beginning of this exit from Egypt and this miraculous path out of the slavery that they had lived in. His dream at the beginning was probably, let's do this thing. I've got a life to live. Let's do this thing. I want to grow some crops. I want to raise some animals. I want to have my family. I want to have a church I can just walk down to them without the oppression that the Egyptians have put on us as a people. As an 85-year-old man, there might still be an element of that hope and vision and dream. Certainly, he said he still is capable of following it as he ever was before. But at this point, it looks to me like his dreams aren't so centered on the things that he's going to get out of the promised land, but it was establishing a legacy for the generations that were going to come after him. That's where his focus was at this point. So Caleb, changed vision, sure, looking for the future, but he'd been kicked around by this at this point for a lot of time. Don't you think that after 39 years in the wilderness, it started to get old? He said he kept the fire alive. The fire was still there. I'm just as anxious to go into battle and take this land as I was when I was a 40-year-old man. He had been kicked around a good bit. Sometimes when life kicks us around, it slows us down. And it's hard to overcome those things. It's easier to hang on to the ways that we have been mistreated. Remember, Caleb was one of the ones who was paying the price for the faithless, even though he was the faithful. Well, life's still going to kick us around a little bit, but I want a faith like Caleb had as I get old. I think I'd make a decent grumpy old man. I don't want to turn into one. I would much rather be a happy old man who's excited about the future and investing in the lives of those who are coming behind. You think about Caleb and the things he had to adjust to. His whole generation was young. Remember, Moses had passed away, and Joshua and Caleb were the only ones from the original generation who were still there. So he was living his life as the old guy around people. Even though we love children and the next generations come along, sometimes they don't understand us, now that I'm among the older ones, and sometimes we don't understand them. At the Global Ministry Center, we have a lot of young people working in the building there, a lot of people in their 20s and so forth. And I use terminology that they don't understand sometimes. I say things about people like Pete Rose and Chris Christopherson and Tip O'Neill. And they kind of look at each other and say, I think he's talking about pastors in Ohio. I think those are pastors in Ohio. Well, Caleb, he was with this generation that was much younger for him, except for Joshua. And they were hanging out with these million kids. And he was anxious for those people to know his Lord, to have a place to worship, and he was interested in a legacy that would not just be there for the next generation or the one after it, but for generations to come. And that's why he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. He even did that when his whole world changed. And the world does change. It changes on us. The world is different than it was when I was growing up. Probably different from some of the times when you were growing up. Dramatic changes in technology, in the airplanes, and the televisions, and the computers, and the spaceships, and the cell phones, and the satellites, and the internet. These have, for the most part, either been invented in our lifetimes or significantly changed in our lifetimes. And sometimes life just isn't that easy to adjust to. I remember when my sweet, dear grandmother, who testified in church every Wednesday night, died when she was 99 years old. Before that, she was living in her house by herself, and we grandkids decided that she needed a microwave, so we bought her a microwave. Put it in her kitchen, and that made her angry. She had never used a microwave, had lived her entire life without a microwave, and felt like nobody needed a microwave. Well, Grandma really liked strong coffee, and she could drink coffee hotter than anybody I've ever seen without burning her tongue. And she did not like it when her coffee got cold, so we showed her that if her coffee cup starts to get cold, she can put it in here, push these numbers, take it out, and it's really, really hot again. And when she saw that happening, Grandma learned to adjust to change. It came easy for her at that point because there was some benefit in this thing, and we're probably going to have to adjust to changes that we don't currently know about ourselves. it's going to take some change. God's word doesn't change. Truth doesn't change. Salvation doesn't change. Right and wrong doesn't change. But the world changed. So the way we present Jesus and the way Jesus affects the world has to change because the world is changing around us. And if it doesn't, we'll become irrelevant. Dreams don't change. Now give me this hill country that the Lord has promised me today. Caleb said, let's do this thing. Let's do it. But all the motivations changed because this land where he had dreamed of raising goats and some wheat, this ambitious life, this life that he had before him, was all different now. The goats and the crops weren't so important. He was looking for a place where his children and all the generations that came after him could meet the Lord, serve the Lord, and worship the Lord. He was anxious to transfer to the next generations a spiritual legacy. It was about doing something for others. So I told you this is going to be a little bit foundation commercial. At the Church of the Nazarene Foundation, we're kind of specialists in helping people give their money away, especially when they want to bless their church. So I was pastoring and living my life, minding my own business, when the Lord shifted gears in my life and said, I need you to go on the road for the denomination and preach about two specific topics, death and money. How would you like to get that call, Pastor Rich? I need you to talk. So you need to become an expert in preaching about death and about money. It is true that we are blessed beyond measure, that we have more than we deserve. God is taking good care of us, and most of us have a little extra. If we slept under a roof last night and have enough food that you're not worried about starving to death over the next week or two, you are some of the most blessed people in the world. And so that's who we are and where we are. And so we know we're going to die. The question is, are we going to be good stewards of the blessings that God has given us in this life when we die? Are we going to do something that will enhance the legacy in God's kingdom for others? So I'm going to tell you the kind of things that people are doing. I will do more of this. We have a session later on in the day where we'll explore some of these topics, but I wanted to give you just a couple of quick things that people do these days, that people are doing when they want to make a gift from their estate, when they want to make a legacy gift, when they want to go to heaven and leave something behind for their children, obviously. We certainly aren't trying to talk anybody out of leaving a blessing for their children. You see that happen all throughout the Old Testament, the inheritance passed down through the generations. And in fact, the Bible tells us that a righteous man leaves an inheritance for his children and his children's children. So we certainly don't want to interrupt anything that's happening there. But we do have the opportunity to make a decision these days. Do I want something from my estate to go to my local church? Do I want it to go to Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene? And what I can promise you is that if you pass away without leaving instructions in the form of a will or a trust to the court and to your family that you want a part of your estate to go to this church, that there is no probate court judge in the state of New York that's going to think of doing that on their own. If you want something from your estate to go to this church so that this church can have generations of ministry, you're going to have to make that decision while you're alive and can still do it. So what are people doing? Well, they're getting wills done. They're getting wills or revocable trust, which is another type of thing. We'll talk about those a good bit in the session here later today, by the way, about the differences in those two things and why people use one over the other. But the fact is 60% of America just doesn't do it. It's one of the most procrastinated things we do. I know I'm talking about all the other people out there. Nobody in this congregation, Pastor Rich, would ever procrastinate getting a will done. And our hope is that you'll go to an attorney and get this done, but since 60% of the people in America have decided not to do that, we have a free way. Somewhere in my life is a little card. That's all right. You'll see them on the counter or on the table that I have out back. But a little card with a QR code on it and a website. And we provide this to you. It's by no means free, but it's free to you. So we hire a national service that produces wills and revocable trusts for people who want to make gifts to nonprofits. You can log on. It's pretty easy. Most people can start answering questions and be done within 30 minutes. And you're going to come up to a question that says, would you like to make a gift to the Church of the Nazarene Foundation? If you click yes on that, then you can say, I want my gift to land at the Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene. And it will pull in all of the state-specific stuff, regardless of which state you live in. It's going to pull in all the right legal material for you. And it's going to put that in your will so that when you go to heaven and your family goes before a probate court judge and says, here it is, we have a will. And we're going to do what this will says. Part of that money is going to come exactly to this church through that gift. It won't happen if you don't make that decision, but if you make that decision, type the right stuff in, print it up, get it notarized, follow all of the specifics for your state, follow the instructions, and then do a very important step for everybody that has made a will or a trust. And that is to tell somebody in your family where you put it. If you've ever been through this conversation, I have been through this conversation numerous times. We know Grandpa had a will, we just don't know where it was. We don't know where that thing is. In fact, as you're passing a legacy on to your children and grandchildren, it's great time to have really good open communication. Let them know what they're receiving. Let them know what the church is receiving. Let them know that all this money and stuff that you're leaving behind is not the important part. Getting to heaven is the important part. Following Jesus, being a disciple of Jesus Christ is the important part. Those are great conversations to happen. Well, we have provided an easy way for you to do this, and I can certainly explain more about that in the session this afternoon. But in reality, you can pick that little card up and go to that website. Explanatory at that point. Well, what other things are people doing? Well, if they're 73 years old or older and have some money in an IRA or a 401k or something, then you are in a situation where the government likes the fact that you have saved for your retirement. Once you hit 73 years of age, they say, it's time to start taking this out. And if you don't start taking this out, we're going to punish you for taking that out. And their congratulations is, we'd like for you to take this out and pay tax on it. Anybody had this experience? It's called a required minimum distribution. And so if you're 73 years of age or older paying tax and giving anything to this church, you can accomplish some goals by having a qualified charitable distribution from your retirement account to Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene. You can do that through the foundation too if you need to. It takes a little bit different kind of a receipt. It's very doable, but almost everybody will pay less taxes if they do that. So that helps us accomplish some of our goals. As much money as possible, to bless your family with as much money as possible when you die, to bless your church with as much money as possible when you die, and to bless the IRS as little as possible when you go to heaven. So you can make those things happen by making those decisions now. So if you're 73 and paying tax and have a retirement account that you have to take money out of, you need to talk to me about a qualified charitable distribution. So it is also true that some people who are people that I work with that are blessing their churches now are giving away something that's important to them, a thing. Most of what we own is not cash, but it's very possible to make charitable contributions out of things that are not cash, that are not liquid. So I tell these stories and all kind of odd things happen. I just got a message from one of our representatives who's preaching in Alaska this week, and he said, I'm just being accountable to you, and he sent me a picture of 12 gold rings. He said, I'm bringing 12 pieces of jewelry back with me from Alaska that are a donation to the Church of the Nazarene. Sometimes there's something spiritual that happens on the inside when God starts talking to us about a particular thing. So I met with a family one time. They just contacted the foundation. They said, if you're in our state sometime, could you swing by? We believe that the Lord's been talking to us about making a gift. And I don't know what that means, if that means whatever, money, real estate, anything. And so I was meeting with these people, and I got the impression that they had a lot of money and they could have given a lot of money away. But God wasn't at that time asking specifically for money. They had a thing that was very important to them. So they began to explain with tears in their eyes that something very meaningful in their life, the Lord was asking for it, and the Lord needed it. In this case, it was for a missions project. And they said, we don't know where the mission project is. We just know that God wants us to give this so that it can happen. And they slid a paper bag across the table to me and said, this is for God's kingdom. So I opened it up and found that it was full of gold bullion, so solid gold bullion, and $25,000 worth of gold bullion there. And I think they could have given $25,000 away, but God wasn't saying to do that. These gold coins had been in their family for a lot of years. I take it that when Christmas and Thanksgiving happened and all the grandkids were over, the grandkids were saying, Grandma and Grandpa, can we play with the gold coins? So they get the gold coins out, play with them and look at them and count them and so forth. It's a very meaningful asset to them. But there was something spiritual happening in this family in the obedience that it took to slide that across the table and give that away. Just so happened they were the last folks I was seeing before I got on the airplane, so I put the bag of gold in my backpack and went to the airport. And that was the day that I learned that the TSA, if you have thousands of dollars worth of gold in your backpack, they would like to have a conversation with you as you get on the airplane. But we made it through that whole process, got it back to Kansas City, liquidated this, went to the Global Mission Department, and they said, we have exactly the project. We have a project that size, and we did not know where the money was going to come from. This is an answer prayer from the Lord. So if we're listening, God may ask you for something sometime. He may ask you to give something away that's very, very important to you. It might take a little security away in order to make that happen. Well, there are people that are donating through unique things like charitable gift annuities and charitable trusts, which are ways to get around capital gains tax with some things. We handle gifts of stock almost every day, every week at least, but we have people that are donating stock, especially when stocks are up a little bit right now. And that's an excellent way to avoid paying the taxes that you might have to pay if you sold those. And land, we handle a piece of real estate or two every month, it seems like, through the foundation. And people will call us up and say, I want to bless my local church. We're in New York, and this lot we own is in Colorado, but we don't need it anymore. In fact, we haven't driven by it in a decade. Can you take it as a gift? And we can take those kind of things and liquidate them and deposit that money into the legacy of Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene. We sometimes get things that are payable upon death. Sometimes they call them transfer upon death. So if you have a will or trust all done, completed, and you feel really good about everything, but you realized, I sort of forgot to leave anything to the church in the process, you can do that with something called a non-probatable asset. It goes right around the will and the trust. It's called a payable upon death. You can do that with certificate of deposit. You can do that with a bank account, with an IRA account, 401k. You can do that with an insurance policy. If you've had a whole life policy that you no longer need anymore, those are donatable. But in at least one state, in Xenia, Ohio, you can do that with a piece of real estate, a deed. And so just a few weeks ago, I got a phone call from a person who said, Grandma said, we can't find her will, but she said, call the Nazarene Foundation. They get the house. We didn't know that. We found out later. We had talked to this person's attorney several years before, but she had made a transfer upon death deed. So she had gone to heaven, and her state, all her bank accounts and everything went through probate, but the house was immediately ours. We actually owned it a few weeks before we knew about it. And so I decided that on my next trip to Ohio, I'd stop in and see it and talk to the realtor and so forth. And that's when I realized that we also inherited all the stuff in the house, including the car in the garage that didn't belong to her, but belonged to another family member who had preceded her in death. And nobody knew where the title was or how to handle that. So this was just the sweetest little lady that you could tell when you walked into the house, here's the chair she sat in most of the time. Her Bible and her reading glasses were on the right. Her medicine was on the left. She could stare straight at the TV, out the front window, and see who's at the door. Her life was spent in that chair, in that easy chair right there. And I thought many times in the elderly years of her life, she's probably wondered what heaven was going to be like, wondered what dying's going to be like, wondered how that transition was going to happen. Her home was actually going to Nazarene Compassionate Ministries, but I believe that it gave her real confidence to know that when I go to heaven, this house which the Lord gave me, this is going into the ministry of his kingdom. That's a wonderful kind of a gift to make, and we did actually get it all straightened up and gave it a good selling, and got the money where it was supposed to go. But deciding to make a legacy type gift from your estate has to happen now rather than later. We also work with people, and I'm just telling you the kind of things that people are doing these days. A lot of times we work with people and they're trying to think about, what should I do for my estate? You know, I have my house, retirement funds, and these various things. How much should I give? Should it be a percentage or whatever? And sometimes the Lord will start dealing with that person and say, 10% of your estate is good. That's a good gift. But in reality, you could give 10% of your estate away right now, and you wouldn't miss out on anything for the rest of your life. Your life's still going to be just as comfortable, just as easy. You're going to have Wheaties every day for breakfast. And so we see people that have looked at their estate, looked at God's blessing, seeking to be a good steward, and decide, should I leave something when I go to heaven? Yes, I should. And then ask the question, if I just gave that right now, would I still be okay? And see, we see people moving their estate gifts into current gifts, which is a wonderful contribution to the writing of the story of the legacy of Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene. Well, I'm just a visitor here. And so you're not going to see me next Sunday. You come back, if you're visiting here today, come back the next few Sundays, and you're going to get much better sermons, let me tell you. They're going to be so much better, and they're going to be lively and full, and everything's going to be wonderful. I'm just here to challenge you today to move forward in that legacy that you're establishing at your local church. If you've decided that this church needs to be here for your children and your children's children and your great-grandchildren, and that this is a worthy cause so that this community can be loved by the members of this church 100 years from now, then I urge you to move something into the legacy commitment of this congregation. God's going to bless this church. He's going to bless this church down through the years, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, from 100 years from now. The 60 years you have under your belt already is just the start. So you have the opportunity to bless the next generations who are going to need Bronx Bethany Church of the Nazarene to provide a gospel message so the 8-year-old boy can get saved and follow the call of God in his life. Well, I'm here today. I have materials. I'm here all day, answer questions. I think we have opportunity for anybody that would like to talk about a gift. We kind of specialize in complicated gifts. So if you have a situation in your life that maybe the Lord's talking to you about making a certain kind of a gift, I'm here today available. And I don't know exactly all the details of what's happening for the meeting this afternoon, but I'm sure you're going to find out. Thank you. Pastor Rich.
I hope you were impacted by the message today. Remember to click like and subscribe and visit our website to stay connected. I want to thank you for your faithfulness in your giving to the Lord. Many of you have consistently, responsively, and sacrificially given, and it has made a world of difference. When you give your tithes and offering today to one fund, you're facilitating the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You're sustaining the local, national, and global ministry of Bronx Bethany, and you're helping to respond to various needs in our immediate community and way beyond. There are a number of ways for you to give. You can text to give. You can visit our giving page at bxbethany.com, or you can mail your gifts to P.O. Box 105, Bronx, New York, 10467. Thank you for your obedience. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your generosity. I'm so glad that you came and worshiped with us today, and I pray that your heart and your soul was enriched. God bless you, and see you next week.